want to ask you, how much did you get roasted by your players this season?
Oren, unceasingly, incessantly.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Geek Peek. My name is Oren and today I'm interviewing Brennan Lee Mulligan about NeverAfter. This is the 16th season of Dimension 20 and this interview was chaotic. I have a lot of fan questions, we talked about the season, production and a lot of stuff about it. You are going to enjoy this interview very much. Before we head into it, please click the like button because that helps me a ton. And while you're down there, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell to keep in touch. So without further ado, enjoy the interview. Brennan, welcome to the show.
Hello.
It's so great to have you again. I am so excited for this interview and I have a lot of questions for you. So we'll begin with our usual one. What's the inspiration behind NeverAfter?
The inspiration behind NeverAfter. We've been wanting to do something with fairy tales for a long time. And I think that fairy tales are very interesting because it's an earlier type of mythic sort of fantasy than high fantasy, the one that sort of generated Dungeons and Dragons, right? If you look at if you look at Tolkien and the idea of developing a non-Earth mythical world, and you see all of the sort of like, you know, the structure that comes from that and that D&D then borrows. There's also something sort of incredibly exciting and fun about going to an even earlier iteration of fairy tales, which are so weird and so different, and obviously a part of, you know, world myth and folklore and kind of occupying this strange, like, you know, very, very popularized during this like post-printing press time period, but also like based on stories and legends that are far older than that. And then weirdly also dreamlike in their quality, you know, like the amount of times that like characters in fairy tales don't even have a name, or the land that they're in is not you know, it's like sort of, in a lot of ways, fairy tales are like the opposite of like a fantasy storytelling. If you think of fantasy storytelling as like a book with a map at the front, Middle Earth, Westeros, right? And then you think of fairy tales as being like, there once was a land, and you're like, that's all you're getting. There was a land. That's it. You're not getting anything else. So we were excited to do fairy tales because it felt like a very different type of fantasy to do. And then in thinking about what's the funniest genre to mix with fairy tales, but that still kind of makes sense, I think we got to horror really quickly. Because, you know, you think of these like Mother Goose, little nursery rhymes, fairy tales, stuff for kids. And then you scratch the surface and you're like, this is the most deeply haunted shit I've ever encountered. It's so freaky and scary. So doing like a very, to us, there's a lot of comedy in the mixing of horror and fairy tale.
Okay, this is going to reassure a lot of people because like, we'll get to the fan questions later, but there are so many people who are worried that this season, as a horror season, will not stay true to the language that Dimension 20 has started with, which was comedy.
Oh, ye of little faith. Come on, guys. What are you so nervous for? You think we're gonna... It's still the show. Honestly, I don't want people to be nervous, but the fact that people are nervous does sort of make me a little... There's a little villainous part of me that's like, ooh, you should be scared. It's going to be 7 people talking about a make-em-up around a table. You know what I mean? It's not, there's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre guy's not going to come into the dome. You know, it's very much us still telling a story. Now, there are going to be some really freaky and spooky and kind of horrifying moments, but also there's hours and hours and hours of us laughing our asses off and being around the table. So Dimension 20, first and foremost, 100% is always a comedy. It is a comedy show. And just like We've had, moments of high drama with A Crown of Candy, or we've done like true mystery with like Mice and Murder. This is using horror, and there's going to be a lot of very faithful horror moments in the show. But fundamentally, it's also, by the way, very much a fairy tale story. Like, it's got both in equal measure. Like, there are parts of the storytelling that are very much loyal to fairy tale structure, right? And have a lot of that. So I think people, weirdly, I think there will be people that are like, this is so scary. And there's also going to be horror enthusiasts that are like, what the hell? This is all lighthearted and funny. So, we're trying to honor all of the genres, as we always do every time we do a big mashup that includes and honors a lot of genres within it. I do not think loyal Dimension 20 fans will find the show unrecognizable. I think it will be exactly the show they've always known and loved, just with a cool new genre that we're having fun playing with.
Okay, awesome. I think that is what everyone wanted to hear. We can all take a deep breath now.
It's okay. Everyone take a deep breath. Nothing bad's going to happen. There's going to be some little scary moments, but I promise.
Something jumps at you.
I promise. Yeah, there's going to be one where I pull the ring out of your laptop. I'm going to shoot out of your screen, and I'm going to go, roll for initiative! No, it's going to be wonderful. Listen, there will be some scary moments, but I don't see us as everything scary that we do in the show is very much in the spirit of making a piece of entertainment. We're not trying to like push the envelope and actually like really like, we're not trying to antagonize anyone watching the show. I think there's some fun little scares, big Halloween Town vibes, big night, like that's our job, but we're not mean vibes for anyone that's a fan of The Nightmare Before Christmas. So yeah, I think people will have a ball. I think it's going to be as much of a hoot and a holler and so much fun and tons of laughter like many seasons before.
Awesome. So in terms of like preparing to tell a horror story, what went into the process of like you as the DM for this season and the players who built their characters to like make certain that making sure they are staying true to the vibe of this season. How do you prepare to tell a horror story?
I think the way you prepare to tell a horror story in actual play, certainly, and if you're going to do a long season, you're going to have 20 episodes. I think the way that you have to prepare is to invest in a richness of character that kind of firmly puts you in a certain type of horror. So these characters, for example, the protagonists of like a slasher horror film don't necessarily need the degree of character development that a character would need over like a 20 episode television series, right? And the reason being is that the motivations and perspective of someone who's trying to not get axe murdered are really self-evident. Like, as soon as someone's running away from an axe murderer, I kind of identify with them. I'm like, yeah, man, I don't want to get axe murdered either. I get this guy. So there's a certain degree. Horror does a really good job of giving you something really primal to relate to in its protagonists, right? People that are trying to survive. With this season of Dimension 20, I think that we wanted to have not just external facing horror, but also a lot of internal facing horror, which to me as a philosophy major and also as, someone who just loves to watch the intrepid heroes, the best, these are like the best players ever grappling with that performance of a character who doesn't just have enemies without. Right? They also have some enemies within. There's also that idea of what are you struggling with? And specifically within NeverAfter, there's, I think, a lot of like that idea of times of horror or of horror coming to a place or of being somewhere and how you react to it. And the fact that some of the ways in which we react and respond to horror are in themselves kind of horrifying, right? There's a lot of those moments we see in horror where like the response that otherwise normal people take to X, Y, or Z thing becomes pretty chilling in and of itself. This season, I think you're going to see a lot of like hearkening back. There's a lot of moments in other seasons that I think told me I wanted to come to this genre and wanted to prepare for it. You know, Baron from the Baronies in sophomore year, or some of the more chilling moments in like A Crown of Candy. There were a lot of those things where I was like, "Ooh, it'd be really fun to go to a freaky world." So there are some moments of actual like fright, but I would say even more than that, there's a lot of there's whole beats and thematic chapters of like dread, of something that's a little bit more ambient and a little bit more dealing with the philosophical and about like your relationship to the unsettlingness of this universe.
Okay, that's so cool. You describe it in such a thrilling way.
It's thrilling. I'm really proud of this season. Also, I have to say, not only did the Intrepid Heroes absolutely smash it, the entire crew this season popped all the way off. It was nuts. Rick Perry, Michael Schaubuck, mad lads. Tyler and Jared, our editors, incredible. Just everyone. Ebony Harden was on this season, who's been our producer, since way back Fantasy High, episode 1. HMU, shout out to Denise Valentine, Kevin and Graham, our camera department. There's a lot of things you can see from the trailer. Stuff is going on with the dome that's a first time for us, and Maron, it's just beautiful. And all the rest of the crew, the whole art team. There's everyone that came on that set was just like a brilliant genius, and it's a pleasure and a joy to work with them. So this season is the technical side of this season. I think people are going to get absolutely blown away by. All I do as I'm watching edits this season is going, I'm stunned. I'm like stunned by what I'm seeing.
Okay, so you mentioned two things here that I want to poke some into. The first thing is the 20 episodes for this season. I think this is the first season of Dimension 20 that has 20 episodes.
Yeah.
Is this the new normal, or was this just like a nuanced occasion for this specific story?
This is sort of, I think, going to be a new normal. Okay. We're doing 20 episodes now. We've come a long way. I mean, the last, even since Starstruck, which we shot. Yeah, like a year, like we stopped shooting like a year and a month, a year and 2 months ago. Within that world, I think first of all, we have like the studio space is new, and Dropout has made a bunch of investments in the show, and things are exciting and going forward. So I think 20 is the new normal for the most part. We did have one season that was longer than 20 episodes, which was sophomore year, but that was obviously weird because it was a live show and it was weekly. But so sophomore year, I think had like, I could be wrong, but like 25, 21? Somewhere in the low 20s, I think.
No, 25, certainly not.
Let me see here. This is when you have to Wikipedia your own show. Hold on. How many episodes sophomore year Fantasy High? Why did I write it like that? Okay, let's see here. Dimension 20 Live. How many episodes were there? Okay. Oh! There were also 20 episodes, but there were 2 live shows. So there was the RTX and then Boys Night for Roll20 Con. And then I guess we also have the one in Brooklyn with Brian David Gilbert, which is not part of this season necessarily, but that's also floating around there. So 20 episodes. Okay. So yes, we are now matching the episode length of sophomore year.
Awesome. Okay. Good to hear that this is the new normal. I like it. More Dimension 20 across the 52 weeks of the year is good for us. And the second thing that I wanted to mention was that you said about the dome.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what can we expect in terms of new mechanics in the dome this year?
It's really cool. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I think you've already seen some in the trailer.
Yes.
Right? So we brought in, not only did we have Kevin Stiller, who's worked with us so many times, we also had Graham Sheldon, who's another awesome DP. Both of them were working on this season. That came in with we had a designer that was sort of bridging, Rick Perry in the art department with the camera department and Kevin and Graham. We had another projectionist sort of come in. We had Matthew LaForest, who's our head of tech, come in and organize the kind of, mechanics of it. But essentially, for one of the first times, so I will say, the dome, the projections, otherworldly. There are some actual in studio sounds as well. So you'll be watching, be like, what am I looking? And you'll see players react to things that normally have only ever been sound effects, sort of in post. And fundamentally, and it's a thing that I don't think you'll ever see referenced, but it's huge for me, is the dome is now partially under my control as well.
Ooh, okay.
Now in the past, me and Shabak were like birds in a murmuration. We're like fish in a school. We were swimming in perfect synchronicity. But what that tool allows of me being able to set up some of those projections or some of those other effects within the dome is to really work on timing and to have, in other words, rather than Shabak listening to me and following my cue, I can set up my own cue so that we get these moments, because horror is really rooted in timing. So there's a lot of those kind of timing things there, and it's really fun to have that kind of flexibility. And the crew did this amazing job of putting the dome together. It's a tight turnaround in the Dropout Studios. I think we had 3 days from when the season of Game Changer wrapped to then setting up this whole new incredible projection thing. And oh boy, they just knocked it out of the park. And the lighting as well. I mean, just the gels, the lighting, everything's set into there. It's just mwah, it's beautiful.
That's so amazing. Also, this feels like there's inspiration here from the season of sophomore year, where you were doing the music in the live show.
Yes, which is really great. I mean, that's always the sort of that's my technical white whale, because in my home games I play ambient music. I have music playing that the players can hear, but for sound reasons we sort of can't do that. So maybe there'll be one day where I can pipe music directly into the cast's brains, and then it will record separately, but the microphones won't pick it up, so we can get the audio clean. We'll figure it out. We'll get brain radio.
Or there could be an AI that would make the music in the vibe that you want, and it will be free.
There you go. How about that?
Okay, let's see. Oh, the most important question. How does it feel to go back to doing physical minis again?
So awesome. That's right. Because let me see so Jasmine was our first GM with Coffin Run to jump back to Rick Perry physical minis. And let me tell you, having these physical minis, the gang, they've really done it up in Washington, in Rick's kingdom of miniatures up there. Shout out to Katie McGeorge and Marcel and so many great painters and artists and sculptors. It was amazing having these sets. It's just so damn cool, and it's very fun too. I mean, there's going to be similarities as well between like A Crown of Candy and doing this stuff, because A Crown of Candy was based on Game of Thrones, which is very like, which has that element of verisimilitude, and it's, you know, it's the opposite of like superhero comics. It's like it's not like kapow. It's like gritty, scary combat. And this is very similar. The combat in this is like, you know, we're in that horror world. So there's some encounters that are challenging, and the way, like the level of ominosity, ominositude.
I'm the foreigner. Don't ask me English questions.
Let's go with ominosity. The degree of dread in these different battle sets is so good. Rick, he's just the man. And coming up with these battles was like really, really fun. And it's just, I think there's something so delightful in these battles too, of like taking classic fairy tales and finding these extremely sinister interpretations of them, and taking like very classic visuals and then rendering them through this lens of horror is like, it was just so fun. All the battle sets are chef's kiss.
Okay, so we have like battle sets, and you also mentioned A Crown of Candy. What can you tell us about like the world building of this season?
The world building for the season is really interesting, and all I will say to fans of this, and this is where we actually, this is maybe one of the first seasons where like talking too much about the world building almost starts to verge on spoilery. So there's an interesting thing here where I will say the world of like with a lot of horror, you don't see the shark for a while. You don't see Jaws for a while. And like there will be there's a creeping piece of mystery in and around the world building. And I would just say to our audience that is watching at home that there's so much about the world building that I'm excited to share, but the NeverAfter is indeed wrapped within the times of shadow and will take its dreadful time in revealing its true nature to our audience. So there's a lot of fun. This is a season that I've had the most fun with, kind of having a lot of cards very close to the chest and making our PCs really fight for every little bit of light they can in a world shrouded in darkness.
Okay. You said it's such a sinister vibe. Okay. I'll leave it at that. About the PCs, the characters this season, is there anything you can tell us about them, like before even the show begins?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can see them in the trailer, I believe. You have the sort of the intros. So they're classic fairy tale characters, right? There's Lou is Pinocchio, Zach is Puss in Boots, Siobhan's Sleeping Beauty, Emily's Little Red Riding Hood, Allie's Mother Goose, and Murph is the Frog Prince. And absolutely classic characters. Really, really, the way everyone plays them is so fun. I'm trying to think if there's anything fun to say about the characters. Some strong vocal choices were made, and I'll tell you right now, they are committed to. So, like, so if you're like, I love it so much. Lou not only nails the voice, rock solid. There's no, like, if you're going like shaking the like structure of a house, like shaking the 2x4s before the walls go up, like it's rock solid. That voice committed the whole way through. It's so funny. Yeah, I think that like this season is very driven by the players. It's very dominated by the players. There's a lot in terms of like coming from their perspective. Especially like in this sort of sense of horror, of like accompanying them through the confusion and the chaos and a lot of the sort of like sense of dread in the world. And also some of the funniest moments. I mean, moments of true like racking my sides. Also, I will say, I think there was enough real life stress in some of the episodes because it's horror. So there's moments where you're like, oh my God, are we going to make it? You know, are we going to survive? There are some adventuring parties in this season that I've never been in a more chaotic interaction anywhere in my life. There are adventuring parties that I'm amazed we caught it on camera of people needing to cut loose after 2 hours of creeping dread, and then they're like, ah! So it's going to be very, very fun. I tune into the adventuring parties this season is all I'll say.
Okay, before we move to the fan questions, I want to ask you, how much did you get roasted by your players this season?
Oren, unceasingly, incessantly. Because when you come into even in playful times, there's that antagonistic relationship between myself and my beloved intrepid heroes, and in those moments where and I came to this season it's horror, I'm gonna get you, and they were like, ah! Just the level of we hit real peak of I got roasted. I got absolutely roasted. So there'll be some great beats, some great moments of me getting my ass handed to me this season for everyone at home. And in a funny way too, not only of me getting roasted by the players at the table, but also getting roasted by their play. There's some really incredible play, mechanically in this season as well, where these guys fire on all cylinders in terms of trying to avoid the fate that the NeverAfter has in store for them.
Amazing. Okay, let's do some fan questions. I got a lot of them. Tracy asks, how scary is NeverAfter going to be, or what is the ratio of scary to comedy hijinks? I have watched every season of Dimension 20, but sometimes horror is a lot for me. How nervous should I be? Are there more relaxed, funny moments in every episode where viewers can have time to breathe?
Yes, to answer your question, there will absolutely be moments. And I think this will, I would say, talk to your friends after they watch episode 1, and you will see how much people will be able to determine for themselves, and your friends will be able to talk to you. It's a comedy show. It's fundamentally a comedy show, and also there's again a lot of fairy tale stuff in it. Horror is not. You can have constant horror in a 2-hour movie over 20 times 2, it's 40 hours of content. There's a lot of beats within the NeverAfter that are just straight fairy tale beats, right? They're very recognizable as just fairy tale. And then of course, more than 50% of it is the intrepid heroes having a ball, is laughing, doing bits together. So you're going to see, this show is going to absolutely satisfy the desire for camaraderie and comfort and laughter and seeing your friends hang out and have a ball watching, have a ball playing D&D together. So fear not, except in very small moments where we would ask you to fear.
Okay. Abbie asks, what is your favorite episode or battle this season?
Favorite episode or battle this season? I love them all. I really, really love them all. I think that there are some very unique ones, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're my favorite. Gosh. I don't know that I can. I don't have a favorite. They're all my children. All of them are my children, and I can't pick a favorite.
Okay. Great. You can, if you wanted to say something, I know you don't want to spoil things, but you can tell us something that when we get to see it, we will recognize it as the thing that you meant. If you want.
I think when you start to see the ink, the ink. That's all I'll say.
Ink. Write it down, folks. Okay.
Should be easy.
Wraena asks, what's the most fun thing that you get to do to establish ambience in a Tales Gone Wrong horror campaign?
The projections. I mean, those projections are in terms of ambiance, like having those projections behind everybody is such a boon, and it made everything feel so visceral and real. And also, I think what's fun too, just on a level of people watching the episodes, is when you have those projections, when the dome is static, the player's focus is all right at the table, which is normally a very good thing. It's like we're focused on the board, we're focused on the screen, we're focused on each other. Having the projections was really great for a horror season because it made everybody do this of like turning to like, like what's behind me, right? And having that feeling of being a little bit smaller than the world, rather, because the dome and the table naturally invites you to kind of feel like a Titan. You feel like an Olympian, in those old like, not Ray Bradbury. I always confuse Ray Bradbury. It's Harryhausen. Let me see, hold on a second. Yes, the Clash of the Titans, right? Or what did he? Yeah. So like those Ray Harryhausen movies of like, the Olympian gods standing over a pool and determining the fate of these little characters within it. So the projections are great in terms of having something actually loom over the players, which is very fun. That's the biggest ambiance setting for sure.
Okay, that's amazing. OffKilter asks, after a particularly emotional or heavy session, how do you like to check in with your players? Similarly, how can I as a player support my GM through the drop after a story ends?
I check in by saying I'm checking in. I will sometimes come up and be like, hey, I'm checking in. How are you doing? I will say that trust is huge. So obviously the thing that makes checking in way easier is if you have a relationship based around already doing that and it becomes something regular rather than kind of like unusual. You're like, hey, just always checking in, right? Like, good to develop that habit. I think it's a good habit to have. And then, in terms of how to support your GM, I would say the same thing. I would just say like, it doesn't have to be a huge deal, if that makes sense. Like having emotional care be routine is actually pretty helpful. It's like hygiene, brushing your teeth, right? You're checking in after a session. Like, are you already in the habit of after a session ends, having a little 3 to 5 minutes just to like babble and be excited and talk about how great it was? Do you have a little ritual around like, hey, like I want to talk to you sometime this week before our next session about stuff I'm thinking about for my character, right? So I think that like my best advice for helping your GM after an ending of something is to like develop a routine around kind of doing that to begin with. But if that is a lot of work, then at the very least you can like make a point to show them that you care. DMing is a lot of work. It's just nice to show that you care.
Okay. Kaitlyn Kluever asks, how many NPCs do you create with a backstory and name for a campaign like this? Or are most of the NPCs made up on the spot?
Well, certainly some of them are always made up on the spot, but this one was very unique in that I was drawing from source material already. So I did tons of research and we had a bunch of amazing consultants this season, and jumped in, who did we have? I had awesome consultations with, Jasmine Buller and Sam DeLev, Bria Iyengar, Erika Ishii, Jian Shim. It was just a crew of really brilliant, amazing people. So with some deep folklore knowledge, which was really great, fairy tales and legends and everything like that. So I had a list of like a huge amount of fairy tale characters, with their stories. And I didn't so much have them have written backstory for them as I had I read their stories and just, I have a pretty good memory of like, okay, that's everyone's story. That's where they're all from. And then I had some ideas around how I thought they might have been corrupted or how I thought they might have been changed or how horror would have like impacted or affected them. And then, some of them I kind of assigned to places and locations in like the long arc or plot of the season. And then others I sort of had up my sleeve, like ready to sort of drop at a moment's notice if need be. So it was a mixture of those different tactics.
Okay. This next one is from Kyle from Texas. And I got a variation of this question a lot. Kyle was the first. Given the explicit horror vibes of this season, I think most fans are assuming this season will have some high lethality elements, much like A Crown of Candy. Is that assumption true? And did the cast have backup characters at the ready?
What an interesting question. I will say, in response to this question, I will say these are some very I cannot fault any of your logic in these observations. I cannot fault any of your logic in these observations, and that's all I can say.
Okay, awesome. Did DMing for Calamity inspire you to go a little bit harder and farther away from comedy in this season?
I would say that I probably knew Starstruck was so fun and wild and goofy. And, it's almost like, it's Dimension 20 is a variety pack. It's an anthology show. So I think I was like, ooh, what are we going to do to change things up from start? We just always like to change. We want to do something we haven't done before. So I think that was already on my mind, but certainly doing Calamity did make me go like, ooh, that's like, there's a fun itch to scratch there. It'd be fun to run with the intrepid heroes through something a little bit stranger and weirder and more sinister in tone. So I think that like Calamity was great in terms of being a fun tonal stretch, but I was certainly not trying to, like, Calamity was drama. This is very much comedy, and Calamity was tragedy, and this is very much horror. But I think Calamity felt like a great stretch of like tonal difference. So that was really engaging and exciting.
Okay. I didn't mention this question was from Alex E. Thank you, Alex. And the next question is from Jacob. What kind of safety tools do you use at the table? How do you navigate difficult subject matter and make sure everyone has a good time?
X-Card, Lines and Veils, the classics. I would say that, again, the primary safety tool, so we have those formal safety tools. In addition to that, if I can anticipate that something is going to be challenging in an upcoming episode, I hip my players to that in advance. I chat with them about it to the degree that it is not necessarily, I try to avoid it being a spoiler, but usually there's a way to communicate a level of comfort in advance of something without it constituting a spoiler, being like, hey, we might what if we explored this sort of broad area? Or what if we went into this part of a character's backstory? So I think getting some collaborative enthusiasm for topics that you are interested in exploring that may be challenging. And then I know I said it before, but I'll just come back to trust again, which is a huge thing, right? Like, we have those formal tools there for a reason, but also most of how we bridge those gaps is informal, meaning that we all feel such a level of trust with each other, which I think is something that is also part of it, right? Like, I want to make sure that people that are playing at home have the formal safety tools, have Lines and Veils, have the X card, but are not using that as a substitute for building trust, checking in with each other, communicating clearly. Like, those two things work in tandem. And I think for me and the Intrepid Heroes, it's a lot of, at this point, that informality, that we feel really comfortable and deputized to just check in and say stuff. That being said, off the top of my head, I can't really remember too many instances of that happening this season, because I think that what pre-discussion does is getting on the same page ahead of time. So in pitching the season concept, in the world building, in the character creation, talking about backstory, checking in before episodes, all of that is trying to create a scenario where, for the most part, you go through an episode and everybody's totally into it. And you get to the end and you go, that was awesome, right? Which is what the was that measure twice, cut once, or like a stitch in time saves 9, like checking in ahead of time. Like, one stitch in a garment in time will save you from needing 9 stitches later. Checking in ahead of, a session and having those conversations early on can make it so that everyone feels totally safe and secure, even exploring scary topics as they go through an episode together. And you get to the end and, everyone feels great. And there was and safety tools were available, but did not need to be used because there were check-ins ahead of time.
Okay, that's awesome. Mercury asks a question. On a scale from 1 to Calamity, how broken will this leave us?
Scale of 1 to Calamity, how broken will this leave us? I think that my hope is that nobody is ever broken. And I would hope that no one was broken by Calamity either. I think that there are going to be, what would be the term I would use here? I think if you are broken by NeverAfter, it will only be to come back patchwork, pieced together, re-glued, fused into something stranger and stronger than you were before. So that's my hope for anyone that gets broken by NeverAfter.
Awesome. Sami asks, this season looks like it's going to be beautifully horrifying, but I can also tell from the trailer we can expect some of the same hilarious shenanigans we've come to expect from our favorite cast. How do you, as a DM, balance creating that atmosphere with making room for them to riff?
I think they go hand in hand, right? I think that monotony doesn't really exist in nature. You watch movies, genre films, right? Whether it's a horror or whether it's I always kind of think of like the sort of Chris Nolan Batman movies as like, it feels like there's one synthy drone that comes on in the second one and is there the whole movie just going like, this is serious. It's serious. And you're just like, okay, this is serious. And it just feels very, doesn't feel quite natural to me, which I guess is not what it's going for. So no shade, but there's something about like there's something very easy to me about the idea of like, horror comes in to interrupt some other it's not sustainable. Like you can't, like literally I don't think your brain can like peak that amount of adrenaline for that long, right? Even like mice, when they get bit by a snake, they go limp. They're like, well, I'm getting eaten. There's no point in being scared anymore, right? I think that none of these tones are possible to persevere for 40 hours, right? It's not even possible. So when people are talking about like balance, like how do you balance a tone? I guess my response would be like, how do you not have a shifting in tone? People's response to fear when they get out of the frightening situation is often to either go into shock, and sometimes going into shock prompts laughter or prompts like, oh my God, I can't believe we made it out of that, right? So at least that's me. I remember, the moments in my life where I've experienced shock due to a sudden, incredibly dangerous or frightening thing. Almost always it's like laughter once you've cleared the danger, right? The
pizza story near Niagara Falls.
Yes, exactly. You're laughing, baby. You're laughing. So I would say that balancing those tones is pretty second nature, and I think maps more to reality. Like, I don't see that as being unusual. I see that as being like a faithful depiction of human nature.
Okay. Melissa asks, "Hi Brennan, I'm so excited for NeverAfter. My question is, how did character creation work for this particular campaign? Did the classic fairy tale figures come first, or were they proposed by Siobhan, Emily, Lou, Allie, and Zach, respectively?"
So character creation was them picking which fairy tales they wanted to be. So they came with a couple. It was sort of a conversation of being like, oh, how many, like, what are your top three? And then we kind of talked about the top three that each of them had. And they pitched sort of like, here's what I think that character would be doing. Here's how I think they would behave or how they would act. Here's my take on them. And then we settled on the 6 that people were the most psyched to play.
Awesome. This question comes from Dees. If you were a player in the world of NeverAfter, what fairy tale character would you have liked to play?
Ooh, Fear Not. I would have wanted to play Fear Not. Fear Not is a deep cut, but it's in Jim Henson's The Storyteller. It's a little boy who cannot be afraid. And I think that's so goddamn freaky. The story of the youth who went forth to learn what fear was. Father had 2 sons. So basically it's about a little boy who cannot feel fear. And I think that's so freaky and cool and strange. And that would have been my if I was playing a fairy tale, I would have played Fear Not.
Okay. Brennan, we're at the end of our little interview. And before I let you go, I want you to tell us where people can find the show. And I want you to also convince us that we're going to love it.
You may find NeverAfter at dropout.tv. You can sign up for a free trial right now if you want to check out other stuff. It's also at youtube.com/Dimension20 Show. We got a bunch of free seasons up there if you want to peruse and check it out. You can find me at Brennan Lee Mulligan on Instagram. You can find me, I guess, for the moment, at BrennanLM on Twitter. We'll see how long that lasts. I'm also at BrennanLM on Hive, which it seems like everyone's migrating to now.
Oh, I need to follow you there too.
I need to, I do not feel it is my job to convince you that you will love NeverAfter. What I will say is that we loved NeverAfter. The cast and the crew are tremendously proud of what we did. I will never insist that any of the people who have been kind enough to watch the show to this point, I will never cajole or hector anybody. I will merely say that we're really proud of it. We're excited to share it with you. And I think it is a classic Dimension 20 season with the cast and crew just absolutely humming at the top of their ability. The engine is roaring on this season, and it's so exciting and gratifying to be able to share it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Geek Peek. If you liked it, please give this video a like, as it helps it spread and reach to more people. And if you want to listen to the next one, it's right here. See you there.